some of these young players had been in this event before. There were plenty of new ones. Before we get to actually on the ice, just tell us about, I'd imagine there is some semblance of team building, sort of like a mini training camp for these young players who, in a lot of ways are beginning their Jets journey together with many of their age group contemporaries, regardless of what the plan is or where they'll be playing later on this season.
One of the things that kind of was beneficial for this group this year was development camp. And I spoke with Domenic DiVincentiis on the first day of when we got to Penticton, and he said that was a big difference as compared to last year to allow the guys to bond together. Penticton kind of happens really fast. And if there's any time for them to bond, it's the trip there. So we have to fly to Calgary, fly to Kelowna, then bus from Kelowna to Penticton. So of the 4 teams, the Jets get the shaft the most. But it's not even close. So it's a long travel day the first day. So I think they get to spend a lot of time together that aspect, and then they're right into a game on Friday against the Edmonton Oilers. But it was good. Saturday they practiced. They got to hang out together. They hung out together immediately after the game on Sunday. And I said this earlier today. Like the game times are not ideal. They play at 4:00 on Friday in the afternoon. Saturday they had off. Sunday they play at 2 p.m. And then on Monday morning, they play at 10 a.m. So there wasn't a whole lot of. You could understand why they looked a little fatigued in the third period of that game against the Calgary Flames yesterday morning/afternoon. But I think there's enough there. And on the way back, we stopped in Kelowna, had a big team dinner at Earl's. So it was fantastic. They also went for a team dinner on Saturday night, I believe, at a place called Salty's, a seafood restaurant right on Lake Okanagan. It's a beautiful, beautiful scenery, of course, to look at while you're having dinner. So there's lots of time for the guys to get together. And I will say this, they hung out a lot. Clearly, I think that's just the best time for them. It's going to get crazy now as camp gets here, and speaking with numerous members of the prospects, they're really excited about getting to main camp just to see how they're going to fit in and how they're going to acclimate to that and that speed and the physicality, I guess, is another way of looking at it.
Hey, speaking of hanging out, before we get to the games and the players, you got to hang out with our old pal Dennis Beyak. How was Dennis doing? We're gonna have to get him back on the show in the next little bit, but
yeah, for sure.
How was he doing? What was it like catching up with a Jets broadcasting legend?
Yeah, listen, Cam Penny, our social media guru, threw up a photo of Dennis on X/Twitter, and I think it got 2,000 likes. Like the guy can do no wrong. Put a statue up already, but that's where he sits. He's the mayor, all that stuff like that. But it was great to catch up with him. He was in Europe for the majority. Like Dennis lives in Kelowna, and clearly a lot of the fires were there. So we spent a good part of the interview talking about the work that was done by the firefighters over that tumultuous time in the Okanagan too.
Was his place okay?
Yeah, his place. I think it was like a kilometer. He said it was away. But a lot of smoke.
Well, I mean, I had heard. I mean, I think Rick was checking in with Dennis, and he was actually in Germany at the time of the fires.
Yeah,
the area was evacuated. Yes. I can't imagine the helpless feeling. You're halfway across the world on another continent, getting this information that your neighborhood has been evacuated. You don't know whether you're coming back to a house or not.
Yeah, 100%. And, he was worried. And I guess when he came back, it was the best time. And on top of this, when we flew to when we got to Penticton, or before we got there, when we got to Kelowna, the road had just opened up because there was a rock avalanche 2 that had blocked one lane of traffic going into Penticton from Kelowna. So that was down to one lane. It had just opened 2 days before we arrived, or else the Jets were going to have to take a long road, the other on Highway 33, I believe, which would add another hour and a half to their travel time. But going back to Dennis, though, it was great to catch up with him. He's happy. He's got one more World Juniors, I believe, in Sweden on his mantle. And then that's it. Like, I mean, it's crazy to think that Dennis Beyak won't be calling games any longer, but it was fantastic to catch up with him. He got to catch up with Craig Heisinger. Zinger was, I don't know if you saw it, Zinger was legendary. Like I talked to him on Sunday afternoon against Vancouver, and it was not a good first period for the Jets. They were completely outplayed by Vancouver, and I asked him if there was improvement from the first period of the game against Edmonton to the game against Vancouver, and his only answer was no. And 4 years, it was like just a resounding no. And the best part of it was if that would have happened to me 4 years ago, I would have been deer in the headlights. What do I do now? But I know I know that's him. You just move on to the next subject, but he's the best. He's the best because he's blunt. He's honest. You never know. He never holds back. And that was one of those times. But
no wasted words. No wasted words. I'm saying.
No, he did have some good words to say about the goaltending and the work.
Well, let's start there. There because I mean, listen. I never try and take too much from this. I mean, when you're watching it, you'll see some kids that stand out. He's really fast. He's got a good shot.
Yeah.
Some of those individual things that'll pop out. But I mean, you're putting these guys together. You're playing, listen, this is not a coached up squad. This is, go out there, show what you can do. And listen, sometimes that can lead to sloppy play, defensive breakdowns. It certainly did seem like the goalies were given plenty of opportunities to shine, and both of them did. What did you think about the young men in net?
Yeah, it was Domenic DiVincentiis in the first game on Friday against Edmonton, and he flat out kept them in the game. They lost 3-1, but he makes 33 saves, and he was outstanding. So you think with DiVincentiis last year, he had to wait till the third game of the tournament. So imagine being a young kid and you're watching Arvid Holm go, and then Oskari Salminen goes, and then it's his turn. You have to wait all the way through there. But what he took from that was the ability to watch how these guys prepared before the game. DiVincentiis ended up being the only goaltender to win a game in the tournament last year as he won the finale against Calgary, and it was great there and great again. And then you go to Thomas Millic on Sunday afternoon against Vancouver when they were completely outplayed for the first two periods. There's a lot of guys from Abbotsford on that roster that Vancouver brought. So there was that men versus boys kind of thing going on for a little bit. But Thomas Millic was unbelievable. He was so good. He had an unbelievable save right at the end of the second period that kept the Jets only down 2 goals. And then there was a huge scrum afterwards. And then talked to a lot of the players afterwards. They said that scrum got them fired up. And of course, Winnipeg played much better in the third period, all because Thomas Millic held them in for the first 40 minutes. And then both goaltenders were fantastic again on Monday morning. So if there's one place to be excited about, and I'm not taking away from anybody else because everybody had their moments, and we'll get to that in a second, it's just that the goaltending looks like it's in a good place. And speaking with Drew McIntyre, who's the Moose goaltending coach / consultant, he scouted both those players before they were drafted by the Winnipeg Jets. He played a large role. He's had a great relationship with them. And he said to me after the Edmonton game that, if I asked those guys to stand on their head and stop pucks that way, they would. That's how much they take, they're great. They're very coachable. They take information. DiVincentiis told me, he goes, I can't get enough information from Drew. I want to take advantage of this as much as I can. So I think, it's a ways down the road. We don't want to look like next year right now about DiVincentiis and Millic, but it looks like the Jets are in a good spot with goaltenders who are drafted in the 7th and 5th round, respectively.
Well, exactly. And I mean, obviously, DiVincentiis projects to go back to the Ontario Hockey League.
Yes.
I think he just had like a 55 save performance in the first game of the season before coming
against Colby Barlow and company. So it's just like
picking up where he left off last season.
Another story that you'll love. When I was talking to DiVincentiis, he said, I was talking to Colby Barlow before this tournament started. I'm like, listen, kid. He says, I'm like, listen, kid. He's like 1 year older than Colby Barlow. And he's like, just play your game and you're going to relax. DiVincentiis, all of one game of Young Stars Classic, experience, passing on wisdom to Colby Barlow. I found that very, very funny. But it's fantastic that, they're friends clearly from their time in the Ontario Hockey League and being Winnipeg Jet prospects, but just you can sense they're a tight-knit group already at this age, so that can only bode well later in the future.
Well, listen, and Barlow was one of just such a big story coming out of the draft, heading into development camp right afterwards.
Yeah.
He and Rucker McGroarty sort of being the vibes guys in and around there that was just so positive. It was so much fun talking about it and hearing from the guys when we were here on this program back in early July. But now, this is serious business. This is professional hockey going into training camp. Which is why for a player like Barlow, I think this tournament is so important. Did you see him sort of progress through the weekend? Get better, get more comfortable through it? And just what were your observations of him? And I'm sure you spoke with him as well. How did he feel that the entire operation went from the Jets first rounder from 2023?
Yeah, well, Mark Morrison said after the first game against Edmonton on Friday that there's a lot of players out there that looked overwhelmed with the speed and size and strength of the opposition. So Edmonton had a few guys that played the American Hockey League in Bakersfield, so a lot of bigger guys, stronger players. I think Colby Barlow kind of fit into that category. And then in the third period against Vancouver, he had a great power play goal and a great setup from Daniel Torgerson. And then you saw him in the shootout with this beautiful shootout goal, looked for 5-hole, and he fired it right through the pads to help the Jets win that shootout. So you see it, and they got set up a couple of times in the power play. You see the release. DiVincentiis was talking about how heavy his shot is, how great his release is. It's there. So that was, you didn't see it in the first game, but you saw it in the next two games. That was something to really be excited about. And another guy, Nikita Chibrikov, fantastic in the third game against Calgary. You're starting to see him dangle. And another thing, he's diminutive, but does not shy away from the hard areas in front of the goal. He doesn't stay away from contact. He was competitive in all three zones. So there's a guy that's going to be a big part of the Manitoba Moose this year, and it looks like he's already acclimating himself to North American hockey very quickly. By the way, his English is tremendous. I'm sure you saw the interviews.
That's what stood out to me from the interviews. I mean, it is so rare you get a Russian coming over at that age that can communicate that. And to be honest, Jamie, that is going to be massive for him because, I mean, when young people come over in positions, like a Chibrikov is, I mean, it's one thing to feel comfortable on the ice. That's probably the easy part as opposed to every other way of life fitting in within your team. And I was just amazed at how well he speaks English. And I think that's going to be huge for him as he sort of, integrates himself into this organization and into this community.
He's genuinely excited about being here, like flat out. And I think when he puts the effort in to learn English, which is clearly not an easy thing to do coming from Russia for the first time, but he's got it down pat. Like he understands everything. He understands what you're asking. He understands what he's saying. So I think that's a great place for him to be in. And then on top of that, he said yesterday, his goal obviously is to make the National Hockey League, but it also helps. The Winnipeg Jets are just down the hallway in the exact same building as the Manitoba Moose. And he says that's a little extra incentive for him going into his first pro season in North America. So I think, he has a great shot, scored a goal yesterday, a goal scorer's goal coming out from behind the net and roof daddied it. It was pretty good shot. And he had a whole bunch of scoring chances before that. And again, not shying away from contact, threw the body around a little bit too. So I think there's some genuine excitement about Nikita Chibrikov heading into this, of course, training camp. Not sure if we'll get a look at him in preseason hockey, but we know he for sure is going to play with the Manitoba Moose this year.
Jamie Thomas joining us to wrap the Penticton tournament for the Jets prospects heading into main camp. Two guys that I'm sure were getting plenty of attention on the ice, and from you guys, former first-rounders, Brad Lambert and Chaz Lucius. How much do you find that they progressed from their first kick at this last year?
Yeah, a lot. Both players played center at this tournament. Both players saw some time on the power play. It was great to see. Chaz Lucius looks like you're starting to see the skill that the Jets were looking at and why they drafted him in the first round. And like the important part is the guy's healthy. He's got a smile on his face. He's enjoying life. Had a great second game. Played extensively with Chibrikov and Barlow. Did Chaz Lucius too, and Brad Lambert had a great tournament as well. Going to see him at center. Now, I don't know if we'll see him at center during the preseason at all for the Jets. That'll be another big question mark or something to watch for when you're putting together your lines that you think could be put together throughout training camp. But I'm with you, buddy. It's just so hard to take everything so seriously when things will change so quickly, right? Who knows how long the junior age players are going to be here? Who knows how long before the Jet? October 1st, I believe, is when the Moose start training camp. So like, it's gonna come fast. So don't get used to what you're seeing right now in the next little bit here, because it's going to change real fast.
Jamie Thomas with this here. The other guy, I found myself, and I mean, I didn't watch all of the games, but I was tuning in. The one that I was particularly excited to see and continue to see how he does in training camp is on the blue line, and that was Elias Salomonsson. Did score a goal, I believe, from Chibrikov at one point. Tell us a little bit about what you saw from Elias, who who many people think has the ability to play at a high level right now. The question, of course, for the organization is what is the best path for him, developing, because he still is a very, very young man, despite playing on a top team in the top league in Sweden.
Right. And I think all you got to do is look at it. Elias Salomonsson looks really, really young when you meet him face to face, but a quiet kid, but you see everything they're talking about, makes great decisions. He's good at moving the puck right away, gets himself out of trouble, battles in front of the net with the opposing forwards. So he was paired with Simon Lundmark yesterday because Tyrel Bauer didn't play in the final game against Calgary. And I like that pairing. And like Simon Lundmark had, I thought, a solid tournament as well. But for Salomonsson, scored a goal yesterday. Great shot from the point on the power play. Almost scored on the power play in the game against Edmonton on Friday. Friday rang a puck off the post. So the offensive side is there, but I think it's the decision-making process where he excels. And I think he's in a good place heading into training camp. And he's a guy, I feel like the roster is already committed to, unless something dramatic happens in training camp. But I think Elias Salomonsson can make a big name for himself coming up over the next couple of weeks.
We've kind of touched on a bunch of the top prospects, and obviously they hit the goalies, Jamie. But give our listeners and Jet fans maybe a player or two that we haven't talked a lot about that you thought acquitted themselves very well for what the opportunity was there for them.
Danny Zilkin. Played the majority of the year last year in the Ontario Hockey League. I thought he's a smart player, like really, really smart. He played center a lot, had the shootout winning goal against Vancouver on Sunday afternoon. Didn't play against Calgary yesterday, but I thought he acquitted himself very well and looks quite comfortable up the middle for the Winnipeg Jets in this tournament. So he's one guy. I thought Daniel Torgerson played a lot better this year than he did last year. He's a big kid, like 6'3", 205. You can see why the Jets like him, right? He's got a good shot. He's always in front of the net. So I think he had a pretty good tournament as well. Last year got off to a slow start for the Manitoba Moose, but had a great second half as well. And then I'm a huge fan of Henry Nikkanen. So, great kid. Also played a lot better this tournament. Last year with the Manitoba Moose, the coaching staff really turned his game around by getting to kill penalties. And that's really become his forte, his strength. He's good at face-offs. So, those three players stood out to me over the tournament on top of the guys I've already talked about.
Hey, you know what? I mean, T. Konopali's in the chat. So he is the founding member and president of the Tyrel Bauer fan club. Tell us about Bauer. And again, he's a very different player. I mean, we're talking about these young high draft picks, and now they project. Listen, there's a lot of Bauer type players in the National Hockey League right now. Path is maybe a little bit different. Big, strong. Again, this is maybe a little different than the Moose days, playing against those pros. Way bigger and stronger than probably a lot of the competition. What did you see in Bauer? And just what do you make of his situation going into training camp with, a very, very busy logjam on defense, but coming off a nice pro debut?
I'll tell you this. He didn't play yesterday either, but and it's sad that I forgot to mention him, but he's the first defenseman they throw out when they're killing penalties, when, any type of scrum around the front of the net, anytime he got anywhere near Thomas Millic or Domenic DiVincentiis, who's there? Tyrel Bauer. Who was wearing A this weekend? Tyrel Bauer. So I think that speaks to how the organization feels about him. We know you notice from development camp, he looks more comfortable. He's comfortable in his own skin within the organization. He's an excellent talker. He's a born leader, in my opinion. He was captain with the Seattle Thunderbirds in the Western Hockey League. He's the guy that teams, this young group has been looking at, for leadership and guidance, because he's got one pro year underneath his belt, and because of his personality. He's a very welcoming guy from Cochrane, Alberta. Some good people come from that town, I hear. So he was a great example, and his physicality is next level. Blocks shots, pays the price. Little nicked up on the weekend. He looked at me and said, "Don't worry, I'll be ready for camp." So it's everything you would want. And I could see why he would be a fan favorite. And I was looking the other day because I saw quite a few of his fights in the American Hockey League last year. And they were online, but the Manitoba Moose posted those. And I looked up his fight card on hockeyfights.com. And I think he only had 8 fights in the Western Hockey League. So I think that says to me people respect him enough. They're not going to drop the gloves with him because he's that strong and tough, right? He's missing a tooth. Like he's got a nice, he just smiles at you. I'm like, I would never mess with that guy ever. So that's the attitude he has when he takes the ice. He's very competitive. So I think the Tyrel Bauer fan club is going to grow and grow over these next few years as a member of the organization.
Yeah, well, to use in an Evander Kane quote, both in training camp and next year, this upcoming season, likely with the Moose, individuals will have the opportunity to F around and find out from Bauer.